Hey everybody, Father Joshua here, Radio Free St. Rita. Just wanted to talk a little bit today, particularly about the gospel which is given in today's Mass, because it's a remarkable story. It's a very famous story, beautiful, and it teaches us so much. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about it. It's John chapter 8, verses 1 through 11. A very famous story of the woman caught in adultery and Jesus' liberation of her, his mercy toward her, literally saving her life. And if you look closely, it's a remarkable story. There's a lot going on. It's early in the morning, and Jesus returns to the temple. When it says there in verse 3 that the scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in adultery, and placing her in her midst, they said to him, "Teacher, this woman has been caught in the act of adultery," right? So the image, a woman caught in adultery placed in the midst, almost as if it's like a trial, and they're setting Jesus up to be the judge. I've always been interested in the detail where it says she was caught in the act of adultery. Presumably someone was watching. I don't know how she was caught in the act of adultery. And likewise, where's the guy? If she's not married, is she engaged? It's quite possibly she's betrothed, Some have even read this story to suggest that this is a guy trying to get out of an engagement, right? So he basically frames this poor woman. But it's always been strange to me that here this woman was caught in the act of adultery, and no one seems to ask the question where the other person is, and what the by law, 2 witnesses were doing there to see it. But nonetheless, this woman is brought to Jesus, set in front of Jesus, as if she's on trial. And they say this woman's been caught in the act of adultery. And in verse 5 it says, "Now in the law Moses commanded us to stone such," right? That goes to Leviticus. There's a bit in Deuteronomy that talks about capital punishment for a woman caught in adultery. Of course, the law sort of punishes the woman and not the man. And so they say, "What do you say?" Right? They bring this woman caught in the act of adultery under strange circumstances, and they say to Jesus, "What's your opinion?" Now John's clear. It says they said this to test him, right? So these scribes and Pharisees who have arrested this poor woman, brought her before Jesus, John makes clear they don't really care about the justice at stake. They don't really care about this woman, right? They just see an opportunity to use this woman's desperate situation as a way to test Jesus. Now the test is this, right? It's quite possible that at this time in Jerusalem, the Jewish people did not have the legal power to inflict capital punishment, rather, not corporal punishment. They didn't have the power of the death penalty, right? That belonged to Rome. And so if Jesus said, "Yeah, stone her, go ahead," he would be violating Roman law, right? But if he says, "No, don't stone her," well, then he's violating Mosaic law, and therefore he's not a prophet. Therefore he's a fraud. We can disperse the crowds who falsely hope in this Jesus, right? And so that's what these Pharisees and scribes think they're doing. That they're testing Jesus to try and tempt him to violate either Roman law or Mosaic law, right? And again, they don't really care about this poor woman who is probably frightened to death. And so that's when Jesus, you know, gets down close to the ground and starts writing on the ground, right? And we don't really know what that gesture means. It's been debated and theorized for 2 millennia. My favorite is from St. Jerome. When St. Jerome comments on this passage, he says that Jesus is writing down the sins of this woman's accuser on the ground. But again, we just don't know. You can ask Jesus when you see him. But what's interesting that Jesus, he says, "Let him who is without sin among you be the first to throw a stone at her." And then he bends down again and continues writing on the ground. Now, what's interesting here is what Jesus is doing, right? He's not making a comment on Roman law. He's not dismissing Mosaic law, right? He's not saying, and he never says, that capital punishment is not a just punishment for the crime of adultery. He doesn't dismiss that at all. Rather, he says, "Let him who is without sin be the first to throw a stone." Right? In Jewish law, in Jewish thought, the accuser, right? The accuser bears a special responsibility for the accusation that is made, and for the punishment, right? And so Jesus, in effect, is telling these scribes and Pharisees to think real hard, right? He is basically throwing their supposed integrity back in their face and saying, "Are you sure? Are you sure that this trumped up frame job, basically, is how you want to play it, right?" And so Jesus takes this fiasco and bring this test, right? And he brings it to a moment of utter seriousness, and in a sense, he just looks these scribes and Pharisees in the eye and says, "Do you really want to do this, right?" And that sort of sobers them up, right? It wises the scribes and Pharisees up. And so, beginning with the eldest, it says, one by one, they leave. And Jesus, when they're finally gone, he looks at the woman, and it's almost like he's being snarky, right? It's almost funny. They leave, and Jesus looks around, and then he looks at her, and he says, "Where'd they go?" Right? And then he says to the woman, "Go and sin no more." And so it is a remarkable passage. It is an attempt to test Jesus, to tear Jesus down, to get him in trouble either with the Romans or to show him to be a fraud to his Jewish followers because he violates the Mosaic law. But Jesus, as in so many other times when he is tested, he beats them, right? He is not taken down by their deceit. And so what does this teach us? This passage cannot be read in sort of an overly liberal way as Jesus, discounting the notion of sin at wholesale, right? I mean, adultery is a sin, and Jesus never denies that. In fact, he says some rather serious things about it elsewhere. But he is, by the story, suggesting that justice is something we ought to take very seriously. That justice is not something that we can manipulate or twist or pretend to use for our own sort of petty agenda. But then also from a sort of a grace perspective, a theological perspective, it's a beautiful story showing us what Jesus does for us, right? Because you and I are like this woman, right? We are caught in our sin, and we're brought before Jesus. And Jesus does not tell us our sin is not sin, right? Doesn't say that at all, never says that. But he offers us his righteousness, right? His innocence, his truth liberates us, right? He banishes the accuser, and then he looks at us and say, where'd they go? And then he says, go and sin no more, right? And so it's a parable, it's a story about what Christ does for us, about our sanctification, about our new life that is possible in Jesus. It's a remarkable story, and you're going to see more and more of these stories as we draw near to Holy Week, as we draw near to Monday, Holy Thursday, and Good Friday, and Easter. You're going to see these stories of deceit and injustice and darkness, but in the darkness you're going to see Christ, who called himself light, who called himself life, can continue to be exactly who he is, even in the darkness, even on Good Friday, even on the cross, and that is the Son of the Father, who is able to, as we see even in death, destroy death. And so this is a beautiful little story which sets us up for imagining ourselves and seeing ourselves as recipients of the grace of Christ, right? Even though we might be surrounded by accusers, even though we might get caught in our sins, right? Even the worst of us, even the greatest sinner, when brought before Jesus like this woman was, no matter the circumstances, will be given the chance, will be offered the same wisdom, the same mercy, the same grace which Jesus offered this woman. And it will give us another chance. It will help us live an entirely new life. And so when you hear, and when I hear, when we hear, Jesus say, go and sin no more, it's our task as renewed people to make the best of it. Hope you're well, and I will talk to you later. Stay healthy.